Today is all about planning clues for your mystery, and we've got a lot to talk about. On the agenda today, we're going to talk about 5 types of clues, my ultra simple spreadsheet for planning clues. Seriously, it's dead simple. And we're going to answer the question, how many clues does your novel really need? Hey everybody, I'm Jane, and the first clue type I want to talk about today is tangible clues. A tangible clue is generally going to be a physical object or substance that gives an indication of where a suspect has been. It can be something they took with them from visiting a location, maybe a matchbook from a bar or a collection of mosquito bites from a visit to a swamp. It can also be something that they left behind, footprints in the snow, maybe their lipstick on another suspect's collar. These clues typically tie 2 things together. Either they tie a character to a specific location, as in the case of that matchbook from the bar, or they may tie 2 characters to one another's presence, as in the case of one character's lipstick on another character's collar. They may also tie those 2 things together at a specific time. For example, if a character left his footprints in the snow, well, then we are going to know that happened sometime after the last snowfall. If a character left her lipstick on another character's collar, we know it happened while he was wearing that shirt, say between when he changed for dinner and when he got ready for bed. One very fun thing about tangible clues is that they can be 2-parters. For example, let's say our victim has blood under her fingernails. Well, that clue ties some character to her presence, and most likely he was there at the time of her death. But we won't know who it is until we find out which character has scratches on his skin. It can be very fun to discover part 1 of a 2-part clue and then send your sleuth on an explicit hunt for part number 2. Our next clue type is emotional clues. Emotional clues are the behaviors and attitudes of the suspects. So let's watch one emotional clue drop in the movie Clue. 6 people have been invited to a mansion on a dark and stormy night by a mysterious unknown host. One of them asks Wadsworth, the butler, the identity of the host, and he smirks and chuckles. Okay, now that's not much, but it lets us know 2 facts. Wadsworth knows the identity of the host, and he finds this information somehow amusing. This clue will eventually be borne out when we learn that Wadsworth is the mysterious host. Any little tick or twinge can be a clue to what a character knows and feels and believes. A hesitation when they're asked a question, an emotional reaction that feels inappropriate to the current circumstances, maybe a flare of anger when another character volunteers information. Characters can also give us emotional clues by changing their long-term behavior patterns. Maybe a character suddenly decides to train as a priest, or maybe a drug-addicted character suddenly decides to get clean and stay that way. Now, in real life, these sort of sudden changes may be the result of a person finally deciding to act on a change that they'd been contemplating for a long time. Not so in fiction. In fiction, these changes will always be the result of the character having a specific transformational experience. Maybe they witnessed a murder or committed a murder. Maybe in the case of our drug addict suspect, he doesn't even know whether he committed a murder. He was blacked out during the time of the crime, and this has scared him into going straight. Our third clue type is revealing knowledge. Revealing knowledge is when your suspect knows something that they shouldn't. It's something you've probably heard of the police using in a high-profile case. They'll hold back a few details from the press about exactly how the crime scene looked. Maybe they'll let the press know that the victim was shot, but not how many times. And the suspect who comes to them with that information is most probably the killer. Like tangible clues, revealing knowledge can tie a suspect to a particular location or even to a particular time and place. But a character can also demonstrate more general revealing knowledge. I read a mystery where an English character used a couple of American colloquialisms, revealing that she'd spent time in the US. That's revealing knowledge of a culture. Another example might be a character who mixes another character's favorite cocktail without asking, despite the fact that they've supposedly just met. That's revealing knowledge of a person. In Clue, Mrs. Peacock mentions that the soup is one of her favorite dishes. It turns out later to be a soup made of monkey brains, something wildly unusual. This demonstrates revealing knowledge of this particular dish, which indicates a prior relationship with the cook. Our fourth clue type is testimony. Testimony is just anything that other characters say to your sleuth. So they might do this in the context of a formal interview, or they may just say things casually while socializing with your sleuth. These characters can testify to each of the other clue types that we've talked about. They can talk about tangible or emotional clues that they've seen. They can mention that another character demonstrated revealing knowledge. They may be aware that they're giving the sleuth the clue, or they may just offer it up accidentally. So let's say that our sleuth wants to know why a suspect arrived early at the theater, and he says, well, I left early because I intended to stop at the church and chat with the vicar, but when I drove by, I noticed the doctor's car parked in front of the vicarage, and since I don't really like the doctor, I decided not to stop. I just drove on to the theater. Well, now we have a tangible clue linking the doctor, or at least someone who was using his car, to the vicarage at a particular time. The clues offered up in testimony can be treated exactly like clues that your sleuth picked up on her own, except with one difference. There's always the possibility that the testifying character is lying. Suspects also frequently offer testimony that lays out the backstory of the plot, the relationships, the tensions, the long-standing problems that exist among the community of characters that your mystery is about. We interview a suspect, and she tells us everything she knows about her brother and his terrible relationship with their father. As when a suspect communicates a tangible clue, well, she may be lying, but this is often how our sleuth will learn about the ins and outs of character relationships, by hearing about them from a third party who knew both characters well. Another way that we can illuminate the character's backstory is with our fifth clue type, artifacts. Artifacts can be really fun items that contribute a lot of information. Bank ledgers, artworks produced by the victim, old letters or diaries, you name it. I've called them artifacts, but they don't have to be strictly physical. For example, your sleuth may have to dig into a local folk legend to figure out the dark deeds of the victim's grandfather, and I'd call that legend an artifact, a fun, fat clue that helps our character understand the events that led someone to murder. As far as I'm concerned, the two best things to do with artifacts are to hunt for them or to puzzle them out. So that local folk legend, our sleuth might hear it for the first time in a distorted form, and she has to work out the puzzle by learning how the legend was distorted and what events it originally referred to. Or that artwork painted by the victim. Well, this is the sort of clue that might be lost or even destroyed, and our sleuth has to go on the hunt for the original item, or perhaps for documentation that reveals the secrets of the original item. Perhaps the victim made some slides of his artwork before it was destroyed. Thumbs up if you're liking this video so far, and then let's talk about absent clues. Sometimes a clue isn't something we see, it is something we don't see. That is, we expected to see a tangible item, an emotional response, etc., but it's not there. And its absence is a clue in and of itself. So probably the most famous absent clue is from the Sherlock Holmes story, The Adventure of Silver Blaze. In this story, a racehorse named Silver Blaze disappears from a stable in the middle of the night. At one point, Sherlock Holmes draws the attention of the inspector on the case to the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. The inspector replies, "The dog did nothing in the nighttime," and Holmes says, "Yes, that was the curious incident." You see, the dog in question always barked at strangers. So the absence of a barking dog indicates the absence of a connection between a character unknown to the dog and the scene of the crime. No one unknown to the dog could have been in the stable that night, or the dog would have barked. So since we already know that some character must have been at the stable on the night of the crime, after all, someone did lead the horse from its stall, well, we can infer that the guilty party is someone the dog recognized. For an absent emotional clue, we can look at The People versus O.J. Simpson. Okay, in this drama, which recaps the events of the O.J. Simpson murder trial, the initial responding officers telephone Simpson, who isn't yet a suspect, to inform him that his ex-wife, Nicole, has been killed.
Oh my God, is she dead? Yes. I'll be on the first flight out of Chicago tomorrow.
All right, did you catch the detail that troubled the officer? Simpson never asked how his ex-wife died. So normally, when people are told that someone they loved has died suddenly, they experience disbelief. And the way they usually express this is by asking, what happened? Simpson doesn't do this. And while it isn't proof of his guilt, it's an indication that perhaps he's not experiencing disbelief at all. Perhaps because he murdered his ex-wife. A character can also display a lack of important knowledge. For example, let's say that one of our characters insists that he was at church when the murder took place. Our sleuth asks him, how was the sermon? And he says, well, it was fine, the usual thing. He doesn't know that on this particular Sunday, the pastor set his sermon to polka music. He doesn't know something he certainly would have known had he been where he said he was. That's a revealing lack of knowledge, and it destroys his alibi. All right, let's talk about how I plan my clues. So this humble creation right here, this is my clue spreadsheet. This is what I use for planning clues, and as you can see, as spreadsheets go, it's quite simple. 2 columns, one is labeled clue and one is labeled information contributed. So let's plot that soup clue that we picked up from Mrs. Peacock on the spreadsheet. On the left is Mrs. Peacock loves monkey brain soup. And on the right, we put Mrs. Peacock knew the cook. That's it. I'm simply keeping track of what information I need to give my sleuth and how she's going to acquire it. When I sit down to plan clues, I can start on either side. Let's say I have a great idea for a really juicy clue. I want the victim to perform a song they've written in the scene right before they die, and I know that something in the lyrics of that song is going to cause the murderer to kill them. But all I've really got is the idea for this scene, and I don't know what about the lyrics is so troubling. In that case, I just write victim song over here on the left. And I can either spend a while trying to figure out options for what information this clue contributes, or I can just let it ride and trust myself to figure out later in the planning process. Or let's say that 2 characters who appear to be strangers to one another are actually working together. Well, on the right-hand side here, I'm just going to write A and B know each other, and now I know I need to figure out a clue that will give my sleuth that info. Maybe we'll discover that they both like the same unusual blend of tea, or maybe the dog belonging to one character seems to be uncharacteristically friendly toward the other. As we fill this in, we can wind up pairing up entries on both sides. So let's say I've got these 2 rows here, and each is blank on one side. Can I make these 2 go together? Well, perhaps the lyrics in my song can allude to a relationship between A and B. Maybe the singer has written a song that threatens to expose an illicit arrangement between A and B, and that is what's going to get him killed. I can just pair those up. But I'm also happy to just leave some sections of the chart blank while I work through the planning of my novel, coming up with cool ideas for scenes, figuring out what pieces of info the sleuth is going to need to put the crime together. How many clues do you actually need to string a mystery together? Honestly, not that many. You will probably need at least 1 clue that makes the killer's motive clear and one that ties him to the actual event of the murder. A clue that ties him to the scene of the crime, to the murder weapon, to the victim's presence. That could be all you need, but you could wind up needing a few more. Maybe your killer has an accomplice, and in that case, you'll need a clue tying that character to the killer. Maybe your killer has an alibi that looks pretty good. In that case, you'll need a clue that helps you expose the fake alibi for what it really is. We're still only at 4, so don't feel like you need to be peppering each chapter with clues. A few good ones go a long way. In a previous video, we talked about creating subplots for each of your fake suspects, and you may need a clue or 2 to set each of these up. But basically, don't stress about needing to come up with a whole slew of clues. You just need 1 clue to prompt each major deduction that your sleuth makes. When I feel like I have my essential clues more or less fleshed out, my next step is going to be writing the last scene of my novel. So this is a trick I've just come up with, and it is so useful. Okay. I'll write the last scene, what is sometimes called the drawing room scene, where the sleuth lays out her deductions and accuses someone of the murder. Now, this is never going to leave me with a version of the scene I can actually use in the final book. I am going to have to rewrite it once I finish the book and I understand the characters and their relationships better. So I'm not worried about making it pretty. I'm basically just roughing in the dialogue, the sleuth's arguments and the villain's objections. Like perhaps the villain will say, "You've got no proof," or "Impossible. Everyone knows that I was at the opera house that night." Writing all this dialogue down will usually point me at 1 or 2 thin spots in my sleuth summation. Things that might sound a little far-fetched, in which case I need to look again at how I've set up my crime, or things that the sleuth genuinely has no way of knowing, in which case I need to re-examine my clue spreadsheet. So let's say, for example, that my villain did commit murder while she was supposed to be performing at the opera house. Well, while I was planning her crime, I decided that she paid her understudy to perform in her place and to keep quiet about it. Maybe the opera involves the use of masks, so this substitution isn't obvious. Well, I decided that was how the crime went down, but while I'm writing the drawing room scene, I realized that I haven't actually planned any way for my sleuth to know about it. She doesn't have anything to say when the villain brings up that particular objection. So now I just need to add a new row to my clue spreadsheet. It's got a blank on one side, and under information contributed, it says the understudy performed the opera. Now, at this point, I may just be itching to actually start writing the book. If you know this channel, you know I love to plan, but even the planniest of planners at some point want to start putting down words. That's fine. My spreadsheet is still going to help me because as I'm working my way through scenes, I know I've got this one clue that I need to work in somewhere. Maybe as I'm writing a scene where the sleuth questions the understudy, she'll notice that the understudy has red roses in her drawing room, roses that were supposedly handed to the actual opera star after her performance. Or maybe my sleuth will notice that the understudy's voice seems raw. I can trust myself to figure that clue out organically because I know what clues are still needed for my plot to come together. I hope you've been enjoying this series so far. I have had so much fun talking about clues and suspects and plot twists. I've got some videos planned on how to create emotional storylines for your mystery. So if you don't want to miss those, please hit the subscribe button right up here and we are going to have so much fun.